Now let us examine the third skandha, which is conception. Now, conception has also been translated as perception, apperception. It could refer to an impression, a notion, an idea, and identification, meaning that, oh, let's call this the table, identification, okay? And I had to look up the dictionary for what is apperception. It says, the mental process by which a person makes sense of an idea by assimilating it to the body of ideas he or she already possesses. That sounds good. I don't think any one of the above terms truly captures the concept of the third skandha, but they all are good in a certain way. Okay, so basically what I perceive, what I think, maybe what I believe, and as I encounter an event. So immediately we can see that what I perceive, what I think, they all go through changes, right? My thinking changes. How I perceive things change. And the conception I have, the idea I have, or something, that meaning also changes. So, similar to the feeling skandha that we talked about last time, when we have a perceived idea, a conception of something, like say a situation, an event, a person, instead of saying or thinking, I think, this is what I think, this is what I see. Conception by itself doesn't represent you, the whole being. It is an idea, a concept, a perception, a perspective, an apperception you have that is within the ocean of your mind, within the landscape, the vast landscape of your conscious activities. It is one of those things. And conception, pop up all the time about all kinds of different events, happenings in our life. It's all over the place. None of these conceptions represent the totality of you. So instead of thinking like we used to, this is my belief, this is what I see, this is what I perceive, we step back a little bit, just like with the feeling. Okay, now it seems that a perception, a conception is generated in this mind. Yeah, there appears to be an idea. Okay, and the advantage of that way of thinking is, okay, I am more objective. Let us examine these ideas. Let me examine how I feel about this, or what my first impression of that person is. It is just one of the many possible conceptions. Let us examine it. In other words, you don't identify yourself with that idea. And when you do identify yourself with the idea, a lot of times we feel like we have to defend it. This is my idea. You can't challenge it. When you challenge it, I have to argue with you. Yeah? And then also, when we see that, oh, it's just a conception, in this landscape of ideas, then it is easier to examine it from different perspectives, different angles, and then let it go. Letting it go when you discover this is not a very good conception. This is not a very good idea. This is a false understanding. This is a misunderstanding. Right? And our mind becomes more flexible and open to different ideas. Right? There are plenty of examples of human beings using concepts to do harm. And often the person doing that don't even realize that. In fact, what we're doing when that happens is that we become enslaved by the concept. We have an example of conceptual enslavement. We're trapped in that concept, thinking that is the truth, that is the reality. For example, when somebody says, hey, he says I'm stupid. He says I'm ugly. He says I'm a coward. And we get really upset. Now that happens everywhere all the time, right? Especially among school kids, yeah? But let us look at this event. What is happening here? He says I'm stupid. He says I'm ugly. He says I'm a coward. Well, stupid, ugly, coward, cowardice, these are concepts. And these are concepts somehow generated in that person through the interaction with me, right? Now, it's just a concept. Just because he says it, just because he thinks it, doesn't make it a reality, does it? So when we get upset, what we are doing is we think that concept is reality. Somehow it's a fact. Or somehow it is more important than it actually is. It's just puff of air. It's just sound vibrations. Right? It could be meaningful. It doesn't have to be meaningful. It's just a concept, just an idea, just some words. And how many times we take those words and give it more weight than it deserves? Whenever a person gets upset because somebody is calling them names, both sides, especially the person receiving those words, are entrapped by conception. But it is just an idea, just a perspective, right? Why do you have to agree with it? Why do you have to have the other person see you in a different way? What is so important about that? Yeah. Similarly, in schools, we all went through school, and school there's different cliques. There's the nerd, the geek, who's cool, who's chill, who's hot, who's popular, who is a sad person, a sad being, who is a wimp, who is weird, who are the elites, and so on and so on. So labels, identifications, name tag, yeah, conception. And we do that all the time. We categorize people, we label groups of people, but the chances are those person who make these labels, who tag these labels onto others, how much do they actually understand the actual being that they're labeling? Is it just a lazy way so that you don't have to understand them? Right? So we do that. This is a social phenomenon. It happens everywhere, right? So we need to step back and recognize, oh, wait a minute, that's conceptual enslavement, conceptual entrapment. You don't have to be trapped by those labels. And then another category, Republican, Democrat, Socialist, Communist. Again, these are labels. Yeah, they do represent certain ideas behind them, but for different people, these ideas may be different too. People have different interpretation of what these terms means, and then when you simply label this group of people or entire nation or this, this party, this political party as this and that, what is happening here? Again, it becomes a lazy way to think that you know them, when you actually probably most likely failed to appreciate the complexity of what is really going on within that group or the individuals in those groups. We probably fail to recognize all the different varieties and the spectrum of differences within them. And then when we label them this and that, we probably also fail to see what is common between all of these groups too. Yeah, so again, we fall into this fallacy of conception. American, Chinese, Indian, Latino, French, German, Japanese, and so on, so on, so on. Whenever we create a label, we say, oh, that's, then this conception, this label is convenient for sure. But then what are the limitations of these concepts? How well do they apply? How close are they to reality? Yeah? Similarly, black people, white people, brown people, red people, these are all very loaded concepts. Yeah? And then different people, when they hear these terms, they generate a different set of concepts and ideas, which influence their judgment. So now we need to understand the emptiness of concepts, emptiness of conception. First of all, we begin by examining our concepts we already formed carefully. Which ideas that you already formed about any situation, any person, any experience, we already have formed thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of conceptions. Now, of course, it's impossible to examine every one of them, but whatever comes into your mind, whatever is happening frequently in our life, let us just step back and examine these particular frequent conceptions carefully. Which conceptions are useful? Which conceptions are hurtful? Which conceptions are actually biased? Which conceptions do correspond to the facts, the data, the reality? Sometimes we need to re-examine our ideas. Yeah? And also we need to understand, we need to look at these concepts. What's the limitation? What's the applicability of these concepts? For example, these are all kind of abstract. For example, I would like to go to a good school. Or what is a good school for my kid? All right, a good school. that is a concept. Now, certainly, some schools are better than others. But in what way? When you say some schools are good, some good schools are not good, what is the standard by which you judge? And does that cover the whole spectrum of that school? Or is that really the important aspect about that school? And how does this concept form? Is it by word of mouth? Is it by careful examination of certain data? Or what? How is that formed? Yeah? So then how applicable it is. When your friend recommends a good school to you, do you do any work to examine that concept? How applicable it is to your situation. Maybe it's great for his kid. It's also great for your kid. What is the difference between your kids and their growing experiences, right? So then it becomes a little more complicated. It's still a good concept, important concept. Let's put my kid through a good school. Well, but then you need to understand its limitation, applicability, and individual differences, right? So now we begin to see that concept. A good school is not a solid, substantial, unchanging concept. It is empty. Empty in the sense that there's so many conditions that vary, that take something or add something to that concept. Yeah, what is a good school? Good for what? Good for who? Good for what kind of people? Good for students of which tendencies, right? Which faculties, which talents, yeah? So, similarly, a good business, a good city to live in, a good city to retire. So all these everyday common concepts. Just because it applies to other people doesn't mean it applies to you. And if it does or if it doesn't, do you know why? So again, the different conditions that goes into that concept. Does it make sense to you? Right? So when we see our concepts this way, then we gain some freedom. We become less likely to be entrapped by these words, these terms, these concepts. Yeah, we have this freedom to associate with the concept or disassociate with the concept, to use this concept or to disown another concept. And then when we get into an argument with somebody, if we remember that concepts are empty, then maybe you just calm your mind enough, you see that, oh, wait a minute, there's no need to defend this belief of mine to that person. There's no need to win this argument. Or maybe you decide, his concept or her concept is so intriguing, even though it's so counterintuitive to mine, that I can learn something. Let me hear them out. Yeah, so things begin to change. How you live your life, how you interact with people begin to change. Yeah, so freedom to adopt new concepts or modify existing concepts because you know that they are not real, they are not substantial, they are not permanent, they are not reality, they are just a concept. Could be useful, could be not useful, right? So when you understand this empty aspect of concepts, then it's easier for us to be flexible, to modify existing concepts, to adopt new concepts, and that leads to an open mind, leads to self-growth, leads to creativity. Yeah? So let's give it an example. The example of, let's say you are a cook, and then you have a dough. You add water to flour, and then you make a dough. Now, what do you do with that dough? We can make 1,000 different things, right? You can make a loaf of bread, you can make sourdough, you can make donuts, you can make bagels, you can, make Chinese bun, you can make Indian bread, right? So how do you make those things? Well, you have a recipe, whether it's a written recipe or maybe it's a recipe in your mind. So then you follow the recipe, you make that type of bread. Now, that recipe is like a concept that you have. This is how you make bread. Now, we have in us a lot of concepts already, right? But a good cook could say, well, let me do something different today. Let me try a different method. Let me change the recipe a little bit. Yeah, let me add something new that I didn't use before. And maybe instead of milk, let me add soy milk and see what happens. Or maybe I'll add coffee. Maybe I might add matcha tea. Right? Maybe I'll add yogurt. Maybe I'll add fruits and nuts, so on. And maybe I'll make a new shape. Maybe I'll add different portions of the ingredients and so on and so on. And maybe I'll bake it in a different way. And then you create something different. Yeah? So this is like, I come up with a new concept. I formed a new conception of this situation. Yeah? And maybe some works and maybe some doesn't work. That's fine. It's an experience. You're flexible with the recipe. You are creative with the recipe. Similarly, when we see the emptiness of a concept, this is not the way you have to make bread. There are 1,000 different ways. This is not the way you have to see this person. There are many other possibilities. Conception is empty. That is why emptiness leads to freedom, leads to open-mindedness, it leads to flexibility. It helps you adapt to situations. It helps you grow and help you become hopefully a better person. Now, the formula that we have used. Conception is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from conception. Conception is emptiness. Emptiness is conception. 1, 2, 3, 4. You notice I didn't really use that formula in this segment. Well, that is okay, because if you are quite familiar with the concept of emptiness and how to use it to different things, then you can already learn a lot, right? So, but just very quickly, 1, 2, 3, 4, transformational meaning and relevance. So concepts, they do transform, right? They do change over time, both in the meaning it represents and then its relevance to you, yeah? And also it depends on the context, the time period, and the individual. So, okay, conception is not different from emptiness. And then we generate concepts from emptiness. So emptiness is not different from conception. What does that mean? Well, in this case, the emptiness represents the whole experience, the totality of experience. The totality of my life actually helped me form a conception at this point in time, in this situation. So the whole interdependent nature of how conception is formed. Emptiness is not different from conception. It come together to help you form a concept, right? And 3, conception is empty. Well, concepts, they are impermanent, they are interdependent, so they are empty in nature, right? And 4, emptiness is conception. Well, Using the similar example we used before, a bodhisattva can create concepts out of emptiness in order to instruct and guide sentient beings. Emptiness is conception. So for example, the Buddha came out with the concepts of Four Noble Truths. He came out with the concept of 5 skandhas in order to help us understand ourselves better, help us move toward the ending, the transcending of our suffering. So, and what those terms mean. What does the Four Noble Truths mean to you? What does form, feeling, conception mean to you? How does it relate to your everyday life? You are gaining these conceptions too, and you're modifying your understanding of this conception as you progress. And hopefully, at the same time, you come to know yourself better. Let us review what we have talked about in this segment. We talked about the emptiness of conception. Concepts are extremely useful in our life, and we use it all the time. We all have hundreds and thousands of concepts, preformed, adopted concepts in our mind already. But then sometimes it is very useful to pause and examine particular concepts you have, particular ideas and beliefs and impression you have of a person or a situation. And then is it well formed? Is it correspond to reality? Or is it misinformed? Is it biased concept? Yeah, and then what's the impact of having those concepts? Yeah, what's the impact of categorizing like we have been doing? Yeah, does it actually help you understand people better, understand your life better, or is it contrary to that? Does it help you misunderstand others, misunderstand the situation? Is it bring good karma to you, or does it make it easier to create bad karma? Yeah. So, and what are my conceptions? The more you examine your conceptions, the more you get to know yourself better.